Hi guys, welcome back to Infinite Possibilities, the podcast where we explore the lives of amazing people, their choices, challenges and opportunities. And today I have a very special guest, Lloyd.
G'day Karen, good to see you today.
Thank you so much for being on the podcast. It's a big honour.
No problems.
Yeah, so Lloyd, what is your kind of one-minute introduction about what you do?
Okay, so basically I'm a knowledge manager and that means that I help people find knowledge when they need it. I help people share it out to everybody else. I connect people to tools and resources basically for things that they need to help them complete their roles.
Oh, sounds fancy and sounds awesome. So we really want to know like how Lloyd got to where he is. So we're going to start right from the beginning. So Lloyd, what kind of child were you like growing up?
That's very interesting. I wasn't particularly academic or sporty. I basically always had a very technical sort of mindset. So even from a young age, when I was first introduced to computers, they first really started to come out from about the age of 10 or 11 upwards. I would spend quite a lot of time on computers at home or even doing electronic experiments. And I have to say I really spent my time more on writing programs than, say, playing games, for instance.
Yeah.
I always had that passion, that desire to learn something new, to make something useful. Even if it was writing a game, for instance, it was the going through the process rather than playing a game.
Yeah.
I got quite interested also in electronics. So from about the age of 12 upwards, I started making circuit boards at home.
Wow.
And just doing all sorts of different things in the way of electronics, yeah.
Yeah, that's amazing. And like, where did you and how did you develop that interest? Because other people are playing games and then you're making them. Like, did you have any influences or did you just suddenly feel like, oh yeah, I want to make them?
I was always quite intrigued by programming, and even back in those days, it was all quite a lot of influence was in assembly language, which is basically the lowest level of programming you could get. So I was always intrigued about that. I found it very complex and tricky.
Yeah.
But it was something that I liked to explore with a little bit. Basic was a big thing back then. Getting online bulletin boards was how you got online back then, way before things such as the internet.
Yeah. Yeah, that's awesome. And how did you sort of fit in the school environment? Not very sporty, not very academic. So did you enjoy school? Did you enjoy reading?
Really. Not at all.
Why is that? You love knowledge. Shouldn't it be like school be the hub of knowledge?
Yeah, the school environment I probably didn't fit in as well as others in the school environment. Yeah. But hey, I got through it. When I left high school, I actually did 2 years at TAFE, and I actually found that was really, a lot of people would say, you know, that's the best years of their life.
Yeah.
And for me, reflecting back, that was most certainly very enjoyable for me, much more than say high school, for instance, because that was where you really got to tap into your actual passion, you know.
Yeah.
So I did a Associate Diploma of Engineering there in computers and electronic engineering, which was really the heart of what I loved to do. So yeah, it was amazing.
Yeah, wow, awesome. And at that time, like, you know, high school-ish, did you sort of have any ideas about the future and what you wanted to do, / what did your parents have anything in particular that they wanted you to pursue?
No, I have to say not really. Towards the end of my teens, you know, I was just started to form a bit of a picture. I really enjoyed programming. I really enjoyed the hardware side of computers as well. So I felt at this stage I could have really ended up going either way. I did come to a realisation at one point though that programming was probably not so much for me because it can be extremely mentally taxing, and it's very hard to separate the work from the out of work hours because it's all in your head.
Yeah.
So it's something that you need to be able to really switch off from. Yeah.
That's hard.
Yeah, so I actually chose to go down the computer hardware path, and that's where my career sort of started in IT support, if you like, many years ago.
Yeah, awesome. And was that your kind of like first job ever, IT support?
Yeah, so my first job was building computers for a computer store.
Ooh, and how was that? A taste of the real world.
Oh, that was interesting. We had a couple of larrikins there in the workshop. Very interesting. Certainly learnt a lot. Have some pretty fond memories of that. And yeah, that I was doing that kind of in parallel to my studies at college.
Oh, you're doing it at the same time?
So it all fitted in together quite well, yes.
Yeah, and how did you manage both at the same time? Was it hard?
No, not at all. I mean, I enjoyed the nature of my work. I enjoyed the nature of my study. Academically at school, I wasn't a very high performer as such, but I was doing all of these computer and electronic things outside of school. So to transition that from my years growing up into this study and to a job was just a natural progression for me. So it worked really well, yeah.
Yeah, that's awesome. And then tell me what was your kind of next job at IBM? Woohoo!
Yeah, that's some years after that. But yes, I ended up doing 6 months with IBM for the Sydney 2000 Olympics.
Wow.
So that was pretty amazing. We were, my team was at the Gabba Cricket Stadium. We had the stadium to ourselves, leading right up to the games. And then we actually, set up all the infrastructure for all the IT needs, the scoring, the media centre, the accreditation centre, etc., etc. And we ran all of that through the course of the soccer playoffs, for instance.
Wow, and you got to watch free sports.
Yeah.
Or nah? Yeah, you did? Yeah, that's awesome. And I think one of the things about your LinkedIn that is amazing is that you've stayed at like companies for like very long periods of time. So your first one, when you were talking about the IT support, you stayed there for 8 years, which was in the Department of Main Roads, yeah? And then the second one, 6 months. And then, so how did you sort of make that transition from working as like an IT support technician for 8 years and then doing the 6-month stint in IBM and then into a very long 13 stint at Lion?
Yeah, that's quite interesting because I went from a permanent type position in government and I stepped out into the contracting world, if you like. And I did do a couple of contracts in between these long stints, if you like. So that was very interesting. I quite enjoyed the short stints of the contracts and the nature of the work, always learning something new. That's always been the undercurrent for me, learning. Yeah.
Yeah, was it hard to leave the government job for something less stable?
It was, most definitely, because particularly after so many years of being anywhere, as we all do, I made some really great...
Yeah, they'd be like, oh my gosh, Lloyd, what are you doing? We miss you.
Yeah, exactly. So had some really great relationships there that I was having to leave behind. And then to a degree going into something that was a little bit, hey, we don't know how this is going to go yet.
Yeah.
Just take it as it comes.
Yeah, and I think that's quite an interesting kind of turning point. So I want to dig a little bit more into it. So what was that? Was there sort of kind of like a trigger or like, I don't know, that what sparked you wanting to try something new, or was something getting kind of the same old? Because 8 years is quite a considerable amount of time.
Yeah, I think a big driver of that was getting to expand myself, getting to do new things.
Yeah.
Getting a wider experience. Basically opening myself up to more opportunities.
Yeah, brave. Nice. We're going to talk about Lion. So you stayed there for like 13 years and 7 months. So what did you begin as? And yeah, take us through the process.
Yeah, that was certainly an interesting one. So when I started there, I started with the company at the time was called Berry, and it was berry fruit juices.
Yeah,
so
lots
all
of fruit
those,
juice in your house, huh?
all those big brands you see on the supermarket shelves, vast majority of those. I worked at a juice factory, if you like, a juice plant. At that stage it was at Balimba in Brisbane. And that was really exciting because I was delving into, say, manufacturing environment, logistics environment. Everything was very fast-paced. There was lots of opportunities for learning all sorts of different technologies and integration of all sorts of different systems and supporting all that all the way through say a production situation where you get raw ingredients, it's all mixed together, it's all packaged and then it's sent out. So so started there, it was just a fruit juice company. And over the 13 years, this company had a number of mergers and acquisitions it was part of. So it evolved into National Foods, which then we became part of a much larger dairy, cheese, yogurt. So
lots of good food in your fridge.
Yeah. So the portfolio of goods and the manufacturing and the warehousing footprint increased.
Yeah, that's crazy.
Quite a bit. So I was responsible for a number of manufacturing plants and warehouses across Queensland, and I was doing that as a state-based IT support role, as a regional support person. So quite often I was dealing with people in Sydney and Melbourne, and just making sure that information was flowing how it needed to, and everybody could basically do all the things they needed to, whether they were an office worker or someone in the warehouse, whether they were scanning goods for one reason or another, or invoicing for trucks coming and going, all of those sorts of things. So it was quite a wide and varied role. And that's really what I enjoyed a lot about working in that sort of environment. You needed to know, a bit about everything.
Yeah.
And then eventually that moved into being part of Lion Nathan, which is, much larger sort of alcoholic beverage group. So then I was stationed at Forex at Milton for the last 3 years of my time there, and I was exposed to much more complexity and much wider range of technologies and tools as well, and which was absolutely amazing.
Yeah, that's amazing how it just grew from just being like a plant company, and then now you can say 13 years at Lion.
Yeah, so it was quite easy to in ways have that continuity of service, because whilst I was in that role continuously, the company changed quite a lot over that time. It was very wide and varying. So my exposure to new things and my opportunities were changing and growing all the time within that time.
Yeah, that's awesome. And what was kind of like a day in the life for the audience to imagine?
Yeah.
So you'd start up, wake up, 8 a.m. start,
Yeah,
8:30.
so you'd basically spend your days walking many, many steps.
Got those.
It could be through the production facility or through a warehouse. I also looked after our scanning infrastructure, RF scanning infrastructure across the country. I'd also have to make sure that people could scan their products. Yeah. And if any part of the infrastructure broke, it was all hands on deck to get that going again quite rapidly, to keep
a lot
the
of
trucks
pressure.
moving and the product moving. Yeah, and this is what they call a FMCG, or fast moving consumer goods situation. So, if you've got products with a very short shelf life, you need to get that product out to market very quick, so it's turning over quite rapidly all the time. So it's very high pressure. We were on an alerting system. If a switch went down or an automated process broke, we'd be getting alerts at all hours.
Wow, so it's kind of like a 24-hour job. Someone wakes you up in the middle of the night?
To some respects, yes, yeah.
Whoa, broken sleep for 13 years. Yeah, and did you enjoy that job?
Mm.
Were you like, yeah, I found it, this is my passion at that point in time?
I did at the time, but it got to the stage where I outgrew that,
Oh.
as we all do. We all
Yeah.
get to a point in our role. We think, okay, well, I've pretty much done everything I can here.
Yeah.
What can I now do to evolve to my next?
Ooh, and then tell me about your next job. Airbus.
Yeah, so I started a role at Airbus in Brisbane, basically supporting the helicopter operations outside of Australia,
Whoa.
or across Australia, I should say. And once again, I went into there in a IT support role. As part of that, my manager introduced me to a process called KCS. Back then it was known as Knowledge Centred Support, now known as Knowledge Centred Service. And this is really where I was introduced to the topic of knowledge management. So whilst I was still very heavily in IT support and very much responsible for making sure people's problems get resolved and they can do their roles in the office, or even their roles to do with maintaining the aircraft, for instance, I was starting to evolve more into the knowledge side of things, making sure people had the knowledge they needed to get back to their jobs quite quickly, whether something's broken on their computer, or whether there's a network situation going on, or whether someone can no longer access an operating manual or a maintenance manual that they need to perform their role. I would be collating the knowledge needed to get these things getting running again quite quickly, and making sure people could tap into that, whether they're ringing into the help desk or whether they're searching and finding that knowledge themselves to help themselves. So that's where I really began my journey into knowledge management.
Yeah, that's awesome. Was it a natural progression, or was it something like the boss is like, hey, on this side, we need someone, or is that kind of...
Yeah, it was kind of a natural progression. I was the senior support officer there.
Yeah.
But that's where I really found my passion for knowledge. It was a very easy move into the knowledge side of things because it just made perfect sense. It's like, hey, this is amazing, I'm learning new stuff. I'm helping other people learn new stuff. I'm helping people to do their jobs and to get back to work much quicker. So for me, that was quite amazing. It was fantastic. And then that was my first role at Airbus. And then I moved into another role at Airbus in the quality team. So this is where I started to transition away from IT and more into a pure knowledge sort of role. And I moved into a 2-year fixed-term contract to become a member of a project to update our quality management system at Airbus Australia. And that was to incorporate knowledge management into our ISO 9001 quality standards.
Oh.
So that we could show to our customer, mainly the Australian Defence Department, that, hey, we know all about managing knowledge, and these are the things we do to help us manage our knowledge across the organisation to therefore serve you well as a customer.
Yeah.
So that was kind of a national role. And I have to say, when they interviewed me for that role, they were like, what are you doing? You're in a permanent role here with, awesome stability, and you're moving into a 2-year fixed-term role.
Yeah.
After 2 years, there may not be something here for you. And that was a real defining point for me, because up until this point in my life, I was very much in a fixed mindset of, need that stability.
Yeah.
Having that family,
Yeah.
evolving at home, and the kids growing up and things like that. We need that stability. And for the first time in quite a long time, I felt, you know what? Doesn't worry me. As I said to them at the time, look, after 2 years, you will either find me another role to go into, or we say goodbye, we part ways, and I find something else.
Yeah.
So that was a real defining moment for me. And it was like, hey, wow, I'm doing this, you know.
How do you progress to that Zen enlightenment stage?
I don't know, I just felt, you know what, I'm going to throw caution to the wind here.
Yeah.
And I'm just going to let it take its path.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. Wow, that's
Yeah.
amazing.
So, you know, I did 18 months there in that role, and then I made the decision to move on.
Yeah. Oh, that's interesting. And then tell me about working for Queensland Department of Education as the knowledge leader. Hello.
Yeah, so I did 4 years there in that role. I moved kind of back into the IT space, but with a very heavy focus on knowledge. So I was managing the knowledge base for IT, for Department of Education corporate and school users. School users being principals, teachers, administration staff. And basically that was all about pumping the knowledge into the knowledge base.
Yeah.
That whole notion where, you know, our support people, they're on the phone helping customers out and they can quickly tap into the knowledge base and pull up articles to help them. And also our customers to be able to once again self-service. It was all about deflecting those calls to self-service, getting people to help themselves as much as possible, to decrease the calls coming into the system, and making sure people knew that, hey, all this knowledge is here to tap into. So we had our first level help desk staff which took the calls, and we also had our second and third level staff. So I was also liaising a lot with those in those second and third level teams to give us knowledge to help our first level teams, you know, complete their calls, get off those calls quicker and onto the next calls as much as possible. So that was really tapping into that knowledge-centred service mindset, where, you know, you want to be dealing with calls as quickly as possible. You want to be minimising people having to call back a second and third time, you know, and you want people to get a consistent, high-quality service experience each and every time they pick up the phone or they search for help. So I built up a network across Queensland with our staff, and I used to work quite a lot with our school-based technicians as well to make sure we were servicing them enough so that they could help the teachers and the principals get back to work quicker whenever they needed, for instance.
Yeah, that's awesome. And how do you sort of like bridge all the knowledge from like the organisation into one kind of central location? How hard is it?
That's very tricky because quite often you have lots of different knowledge repositories for different sorts of knowledge, and different sorts of knowledge is structured in different ways, or they're targeted at different audiences. So it's very hard to bring everything into a single sort of source of knowledge, if you like. The best you can do in those sorts of cases is link out from one to the other, to the other, to the other, and perhaps have a single area where people know they can go to, but that will link them out onto the other areas to help them find the other information as much as possible. When you're talking about these sorts of things like support knowledge, as much as possible you want to have a single source of truth. You know, you don't want to be having copies of the same knowledge all over the place, 3 or 4 or 5 copies, because if one changes, then the others are out of date. So I've always been a big proponent of, hey, let's link to this, let's link to that, so that once this is updated, because you're linked to it, it doesn't affect you. The new information just flows.
And would you say in your sort of knowledge role, like, is there any aspect of like the technical that you have to deal with, or is it mainly kind of non-technical?
In an IT or a KCS type role, most definitely there's a lot of technical. You still, to a degree, whilst you're not hands-on fixing things, you still have to be very much aware of what's going on. What are the new systems coming online? What are the sorts of things that could possibly go wrong? What are the sorts of things that would be great to point out to people, say a top 10 FAQ, for instance? You know, so you're always liaising with the product owners, or the product developers to make sure that we're gaining as much of that knowledge as possible and putting that online as early as possible.
That's cool. So do you do stuff like data migration and worry about that stuff? Or?
Occasionally, whenever we transition a help desk system to a new platform, most definitely you have to be able to do things such as data migrations. And we did quite a major project just before I left there, upgrading our ServiceNow instance. We were migrating from a heavily customised instance of ServiceNow for our IT support into a very much, they call it out-of-the-box experience. Very much as possible, we will keep the experience as intended by the product vendor, and we will keep the modifications of that as little as possible, which eases future upgradability of the product, for instance.
That's awesome. And it's so awesome to know that like your previous experience being technical has actually flowed very well and very nicely, and it has almost become your kind of advantage point. And then tell me what sort of sparked the move into the corporate world, right? You've been working government, and then now to KPMG.
So once again, I felt that's quite a seamless sort of move for me. But getting more back into that core knowledge focus. So I've stepped away from IT again, and I'm really back into that focus of organisational-wide knowledge, which I really love. The notion that every part of the organisation can benefit from knowledge management, whether it's managing your projects better with things like decision tables, lessons learned, for instance, business as usual activities, documenting our processes, improving our processes, or just retaining and being able to find work that we've done before so we're not recreating the wheel.
Yeah, that's pretty cool. So is there like particular teams that you work with? Because it sounds like as like being in knowledge, you would actually have to be very well connected to all of the organisation.
Most definitely. You need to have good people networks, strong communications across a wide range of teams, because you're really relying on people to share the knowledge. But you're also helping people tap into that knowledge. So you've got to be very outward facing. You've got to be in some ways proactive, in some ways reactive. You've got to know who to tap into for what. And then you've got to be able to help people also know who to tap into what and to go where for what. So quite a lot of it is about connecting people to other people, or connecting people to resources and tools along the way. And there's a lot of education going on all the time because people change, we have new people coming in, people exiting. So you're constantly running that education piece as well. You're constantly engaging with teams. You're getting into those teams meetings to help them invigorate their groups, their teams, and help them, have those light bulb moments and really be able to understand what it is we've got in terms of knowledge that they can use.
That's awesome. And do you think knowledge management is like you found it, this is your passion, or do you believe that like at every stage, kind of every cycle, every season, you'll go through different things as like focal points for your passion?
I think for me, knowledge management is that passion I kind of discovered, through my career, and I absolutely love knowledge management, the whole notion of, knowledge, the whole notion of learning, of sharing, of connecting people to knowledge. I've had moments where I've connected people to other people in interactions where they've been able to help each other out.
That's beautiful.
Like you're tapping into those sorts of coffee machine conversations, if you like, or water cooler conversations. You're actually, I've created a process that formalises that and allows people, to make connections and to discover, things they didn't know that the other person can help them with,
Yeah.
whether it's somebody else they know or whether they've got the knowledge they need. There's nothing worse than, feverishly working away on a project for weeks or months and finally knocking something out that's really of value. When someone 2 or 3 or 4 desks away had all that knowledge all along, you've worked really hard to do this, and you go, oh, hang on, you could have helped me.
Yeah.
So I try and create those opportunities for people to make those connections to reduce those frustrations and those time.
Yeah, that's awesome. Good on you. Yeah, and then I think there are a lot of young people that are watching my podcast and they're like a little bit lost in life, and I'm very inspired by your passion. Like, how does one find their passion?
Yeah, I think for me it was just discovery along the way, just trying different things, discovering things, and just taking note of how I'm feeling, am I really loving this? Is this something I love so much I could do as a job and not be hard, if you know what I mean?
Yeah.
Something that's easy to get up in the mornings and go to work for, which this is for me. I absolutely love the nature of my work.
Yeah.
So to a large degree, it keeps me going for sure.
Yeah. And then, do you mind explaining to the audience, why does knowledge management matter? And do you think it's sort of like, has it been sort of hard to sort of like talk to like the senior management, like why we should invest? Because knowledge management is very much kind of like a long-term thing, right? And then like they might not see the quick hits and the quick wins.
Yeah, most definitely. That is a big challenge, because quite often you're leading from sort of the middle, and whilst you're managing people to a degree below you, they're kind of responsible to you in terms of knowledge, working with knowledge. So you're leading people below you and across ways.
Yeah.
But you also have to be able to lead upwards, and you also have to be able to deliver that message to those higher levels, and know that those staff at the higher levels are backing you, are behind you. They really need to be able to deliver the knowledge message from their level down as much. And I always seen it as kind of meeting them in the middle.
Yeah.
Because you need them to give their workers almost the permission, if you like, to say, hey, okay, your core role is this, your core role is that, your core role is that. But at the same time, there's an underlying current of knowledge that needs to be addressed while we do our roles. And for instance, a good example is lessons learned. If you've got someone has made this awesome discovery through a project, you'd want to know that you'd be able to find that out yourself and apply that in your own project, rather than have to experience it yourself, go through the pain of experiencing that. Perhaps it was something that went wrong. Well, you can read about this lesson and go, well, okay, if I do it this way, such and such will happen, so therefore I should do it this way. Another thing about knowledge management is preserving the knowledge of the organisation. So if you have someone go on leave for an extended amount of time, or someone that leaves the organisation, you have to stop and think, well, how much of a gap are we going to have in knowledge once that person goes? What people rely on this person in order to be able to do their role. So this is another thing I look at, and I call it lotto-proofing your knowledge. So before somebody exits, for instance, we like to capture, what are the meetings they go to, what are the files and folders they use, what are all the contacts they have, etc., etc., etc. So that if someone else steps into that role, you can hand all that over to them and say, hey, you've got the position description that says what you have to do, but now you've also got this that tells you how you're going to be able to do it. Which allows that person to ramp up very quickly, become proficient at the role much quicker, and lean on their team members and their manager much less.
Yeah, that's hard to do though.
Yeah, very much so. But all these little things actually add up. It could be, as much as just increasing the performance of the organisation, because people can tap into all these things much quicker. To a degree, in the commercial world, you know, you're talking about competitive advantage as well.
Yeah. Wow. And so what are the nitty-gritty of like how to make sure that the knowledge stays within the company when someone leaves? So are you talking about like, I guess one would be like standardizing the process, right? Would you be creating like a manual, a workbook, that kind of thing? Would you be sort of like, I imagine, conducting interviews with employees of certain teams and then asking them what are their resources? Is that kind of like the job?
Yeah,
or?
most definitely. I mean, that's not part of my role, what I do, but that's very much something that I encourage managers to do.
Yeah.
You know, I have these conversations a lot, and whilst that's not, as I say, part of my core focus, because I have to concentrate on that, I also like to drive awareness of the broader knowledge management topics and aspects. You know, what are the other ways that you can do to help your teams perform and retain knowledge and share knowledge between you so that, you know, your team can be operating at its best.
Yeah. Do you find that this job requires like a lot of creativity, or are there standard ways of doing things?
Yeah, you need to have creativity to a degree, for sure.
Yeah.
You have to be able to put together a compelling message, put together a compelling presentation, for instance, that catches people's attentions. And you know, you have to be able to take something and sometimes be able to transform it into something else that people can use, for instance. Yeah.
Would you say knowledge management has very close links to process improvement?
Most definitely, yeah. You know, you could be looking at a process and thinking, well, can we do this better? You know, and that's going into the lean space where you're actually analysing processes and you're thinking, well, how long does each step take? You know, and that's where the knowledge comes into it, knowing how a process runs and knowing all the dependencies, all the dependent people along the way, what knowledge is needed for this step, what's passed on to the next step. You know, and like you could say, for instance, look at in the middle of a process, this task, well, what's required before this task can operate? Well, what other things can they do upline beforehand to help this process run more optimally? You know, a great example was Airbus on their commercial aircraft production line for one of their aircraft. They were running really behind on schedule. They weren't looking at making their orders in time. And the person installing the wiring looms into the aircraft fuselage talked with the person that supplied the wiring looms. And it's like, well, what can you do to help me install the wiring looms quicker?
Yeah, that's good.
You know, so all the people along this production line talked with their suppliers, if you like, and they really, you know, smash it. At the end of the day, they smashed the ballpark. They really rapidly increased their production and they got their orders met.
Yeah, that's so interesting. Yeah, I think the flow of information is very much dependent on like how connected people are,
Most
even like
definitely.
across different teams, and that's like quite hard to do as the organisation gets bigger and there are like more silos and more specialisation.
That's right. You know, they say it's about people, process and technology, but to me at the end of the day, it's all about people connecting.
Yeah.
You know, we all carry along in our heads a lot of knowledge in our heads. That's called tacit knowledge.
Yeah.
And that's a combination of your life experiences and your work experiences. And you bring that knowledge with you, and that influences a lot of things that you do, your ways of working, for instance, at work. And this is where the diversity of the people we have across our workforce comes into play. We're tapping into people's different life experiences and work experiences through their tacit knowledge. You know, there's only so much of that you can capture and put on paper.
Yeah.
A lot of that is experiential. But, we can share that between us, and we can all, learn from that and benefit from that.
Yeah, the ideal world, right? Everyone just shares and yeah, and just kind of curious to know, like, who are the people that have personally like inspired you and have like had a big influence on your life?
Yeah, probably my biggest influences, and lately, whilst I've been doing knowledge management, would be some of those great leaders in knowledge management across the world, such as Arthur Shalley, who's in Australia, David Gertine in the UK, Stephanie Barnes in Germany. There's many other names as well. So I like to follow a lot of these, thought leaders, if you like, in the knowledge space, and really, get inspiration from the work that they're doing. There's so many people in the knowledge management arena that are doing awesome things. They're all doing different things in a way, because I find that everyone kind of finds a little niche or specialisation. It's all knowledge management, but we're all taking a little bit of a different angle on it. And you put all that together, it really allows you to tap into quite a wide range of experiences and tools and processes that all these people can bring to the table. Yeah, it's quite inspiring. It's awesome.
That's awesome. And so we're nearly at the end of the podcast. Just a few more quick questions. So the deep one, Lloyd, the one that you've been dreading, what do you think the meaning of life is, in your opinion?
I would always say 42.
Oh, not again.
Look, for me, it's about connections, relationships, whether that's personal relationships or working relationships. It's connecting with people.
Yeah, that's awesome. So if you won the lottery tomorrow, what would you do differently about your life, right? Person leaves the organisation, what happens to the knowledge management? But what would you do differently?
Wow, that's an interesting one. I've always, for quite a long time, I've been passionate about permaculture, growing food, getting a little bit more back to nature sort of thing. Yeah. So I would probably buy quite a large block of land, disappear for a little while at the very least,
Oh, that's awesome. So we'll know when that happens, right? Cannot reach Lloyd. And the final question is, what is an ideal day in the life for you? It can be work-related, it can be non-work related.
I think... a day where I get to do a little bit of everything. I have a few little projects I like to do at home. Learning new things. And also, obviously, when I'm coming to work, being able to really, achieve some goals. So whether that's connecting someone to someone or something, to me, that's what it's all about. And then of course spending some time with the family, being able to just connect with members of my family with the things that they love to do,
Oh, that's kind of sweet. Yeah. That's awesome. So we're at the end of the podcast. Want to say bye?
Thank you.
Bye.
Bye.